Imagine being so terrified after a loved one's murder that you couldn't even put a headstone on their grave.
Oh, wow.
That was the reality for the Coggins family for over 30 years after the brutal, racially motivated murder of Timothy Coggins
Yeah.
back in 1983.
Right.
We're diving deep into this case today, pulling from the Morbid podcast episode and a GQ article by Wesley Lowery.
Okay.
It's a story of hate and justice and a long, long fight for truth.
Yeah. You know what strikes me is how this case isn't just a murder investigation.
Right.
It's a window into the racial tensions that plagued Spalding County, Georgia in the 1980s.
Yeah,
And the systemic issues that allowed this case to go cold for decades.
absolutely. So let's start by painting a picture of Timothy.
Yeah.
What kind of person was he?
Timothy was, by all accounts, a bright light, fun-loving, deeply protective of his family, especially his mother and sisters. And he loved music and dancing.
He sounds like someone who brought joy to those around him.
He absolutely did.
Yeah.
He was known for his warmth and that infectious smile. The People's Choice Club, a central spot for Griffin's Black community in the 80s, was where he really came alive.
Yeah.
On the dance floor.
It's heartbreaking to think that's also where this story takes such a dark turn.
Right.
We're talking about 1983 in rural Georgia,
Yeah.
a place and time where the Ku Klux Klan still had a visible presence, and interracial relationships were taboo, to say the least.
You're right. The backdrop here is crucial.
Yeah.
Spalding County at that time was still grappling with the toxic legacy of segregation and white supremacy.
Right.
This wasn't some abstract concept. It was the lived reality.
Yeah.
For Black residents, active KKK chapters meant constant fear and intimidation.
And Timothy was dating a white woman named Mickey Guy. This relationship in that environment put a target on his back.
Exactly. It's impossible to separate the racial climate from the events that unfolded.
So on October 7th, Timothy heads to the People's Choice to meet up with Mickey. But there's this chilling detail.
Okay.
His sister Tissa overhears someone say there are white men outside asking for him.
Oh, wow.
Now imagine hearing that in that place and time.
For Tissa, those words must have been like a punch to the gut.
Yeah.
She immediately sensed danger, a feeling that sadly turned out to be justified. She followed Timothy worried, but by the time she got to the parking lot, he was gone. It was the last time she saw him alive.
2 days later, a horrifying discovery.
Oh.
A young black man's body is found brutally beaten and stabbed in a field close to the club. The police were actually circulating a photo of the victim.
Wow.
Beaten so badly, he was unrecognizable to try and identify him.
It's hard to fathom the trauma inflicted on the Coggins family, not just by Timothy's murder, but by the callous way the investigation began.
Right.
The fact that they had to rely on a patron at the People's Choice to suggest checking with the family.
Yeah.
It speaks to a system that dehumanized Black victims.
And the autopsy revealed the true extent of the brutality.
Okay.
Dozens of stab wounds, signs of being dragged behind a vehicle.
Oh my God.
And a detail that sends shivers down my spine. An X carved into his chest.
That X wasn't just a random act of cruelty. It's deeply symbolic, reminiscent of the lynchings that haunted the South's history.
Wow.
This was a message intended to terrorize the entire Black community.
One of the few black officers in the department, Oscar Jordan,
Okay.
is assigned to the case.
Mm-hmm.
Early on, he hears about 2 white men who'd given Timothy money for marijuana and figures it might be a drug deal gone wrong.
Right.
But then he sees the crime scene, the sheer brutality of it,
Yeah.
and knows there's something more to this.
Right. And as the details emerged, the drug deal theory became less and less plausible.
Yeah.
The level of violence, the racial element, the intimidation tactics that followed it all pointed to something much darker and more insidious.
Jordan gets a break when a woman named Sandra Bunn, who lived in the same trailer park as Frank Gart, Mickey Guy's boyfriend,
Right.
starts bragging to her neighbors about seeing Timothy with Frank and another man, Bill Moore, on the night of the murder. She describes them leaving together in Frank's car, heading in the direction of a place chillingly called the Hanging Tree,
Oh, God.
which is where Timothy's body was found.
And here's where the systemic racism that plagued the investigation becomes glaringly obvious.
Right.
Jordan has solid leads, potential motives, witnesses a timeline, but his efforts are met with obstruction from within his own department.
Instead of getting the go-ahead to interview Frank and Bill, he's inexplicably pulled off the case
Wow.
and reassigned to traffic duty.
It's a shocking turn of events. A dedicated officer pursuing legitimate leads is silenced and sidelined, and the timing is incredibly suspect.
Yeah.
This wasn't just bad policing. It was a tactic used across the South to silence Black officers and protect white perpetrators.
And as the investigation stalls, The Coggins family is subjected to a horrifying campaign of terror. We're
Oh,
talking anonymous threats. A bloody shirt left on their stepfather's bus, a brick thrown through their window with a note saying, "You're next."
this wasn't just about intimidating the family. It was about sending a message to the entire Black community.
Right.
Stay silent, stay in your place, or face the consequences.
Then it escalates. Someone breaks into their home and leaves a decapitated dog in the hallway.
Oh, my goodness.
Think about the level of fear that would instill.
Yeah.
They were so terrified that they buried Timothy without a headstone, fearing further desecration of his grave.
The decapitated dog wasn't just cruel, it was a symbolic attack meant to dehumanize Timothy even in death and instill primal fear in his family.
Right.
This level of terror was meant to ensure their silence and prevent justice from being served.
So the investigation is dead in the water. The family is living in fear, and the case goes cold. Decades pass, and it seems like Timothy's killers will never be brought to justice.
This is a recurring theme in cases involving racial violence.
Yeah.
The lack of urgency, the mishandling of evidence, the silencing of witnesses all contribute to a climate of impunity that allows perpetrators to escape accountability.
Fast forward to 2016, GBI agent Jared Coleman reopens the case, and he's immediately struck by what's missing from the file. Oscar Jordan's notes clearly pointed to Frank and Bill, but there's hardly any follow-up. Key pieces of evidence: Timothy's clothes, the table leg, the tire impressions had vanished.
The missing evidence raises serious questions. Was this incompetence or a deliberate attempt to protect someone?
Yeah.
This is where the suspicion of a cover-up starts to take root.
But there was one piece of information that could crack the case. Wide-open letters from an inmate named Christopher Vaughn.
Okay.
Now, before you judge, keep in mind this guy was a convicted child molester.
Right.
But he claimed that over the years, Frank had repeatedly confessed to him about killing Timothy.
It's tricky. Vaughn was a deeply flawed source.
Right.
But his details about the well matched what others had heard, lending credibility to his claims.
Yeah.
His accounts of Frank's boastful confessions, while disturbing, offered a glimpse into the mindset of someone who seemed to revel in the act of racial violence.
Vaughn even claimed that Frank bragged about dumping all the evidence in an old well on his property.
This was a critical detail.
Yeah.
The existence of the well and the possibility of finding physical evidence after so many years offered a glimmer of hope for justice.
So Coleman needed access to that well, and that meant going to the newly elected Sheriff Darrell Dix, who thankfully recognized the need to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the Black community.
Right.
He saw this case as a chance to start rebuilding trust and gave Coleman his full support.
Sheriff Dix's willingness to cooperate with Coleman marked a turning point in the case.
Yeah.
His commitment to uncovering the truth, even if it meant confronting uncomfortable aspects of his department's past, is commendable.
Meanwhile, Coleman went to interview Frank, who was now in prison for sexual assault.
Yeah.
No surprise, he denied everything. But when confronted with the fact that Mickey had been cheating on him with Timothy, his demeanor changed. He still claimed he had nothing to do with the murder, but said Timothy should have minded his own business.
That statement is chilling.
Yeah.
It reveals a complete lack of remorse and a callous disregard for Timothy's life. It also hints at the underlying racial animus that may have motivated the crime.
So Frank wasn't talking. But Coleman had another ace up his sleeve, that old well. When pressed about it, Frank basically dared them to dig it up.
And that's exactly what they did. The decision to excavate the well, despite the logistical challenges and the risk of finding nothing, speaks to Coleman's determination to uncover the truth no matter how deeply buried it may be.
They brought in a company that used a high-pressure hose and vacuum called a hydrovac to excavate the well without damaging the property.
This was key.
Yeah.
The hydrovac allowed them to carefully excavate the well without disturbing potential evidence. It was a delicate operation, but it paid off in a big way.
And what they found was incredible. A pair of Adidas sneakers matching what Timothy was wearing that night. A blood-stained white t-shirt ripped by stab marks, a piece of logging chain.
Each item pulled from that well was like a whisper from the past, corroborating the witness testimonies and strengthening the case against Frank. They weren't just random objects. They were tangible links to the crime that had been hidden for decades.
And most importantly, they found a broken kitchen knife that matched the wounds on Timothy's chest and neck.
The knife was a pivotal moment.
Yeah.
It was a weapon consistent with the murder, providing concrete physical evidence that could directly tie Frank to the crime. It was a smoking gun that had been buried for 33 years. But thanks to Coleman's persistence, it had finally come to light.
Timothy's sister Tissa immediately recognized the shoe as her brother's, and the prosecution finally had the evidence they needed to move forward.
Wow.
But they weren't done yet. There was still the matter of the cover-up.
This aspect of the case is crucial. It exposes the systemic rot within the Spalding County Sheriff's Department.
Right.
It wasn't just about individuals committing a horrific crime. It was about a culture of racism that allowed that crime to go unpunished for decades.
While searching through the evidence, they found a diary belonging to a former sheriff's deputy, Norman Fusky,
Okay.
who worked on the case back in '83. And what did this diary reveal? Evidence of KKK infiltration in both the Sheriff's Department and the Griffin Police Department.
This was a bombshell. The diary, a first-hand account of the Klan's activities within law enforcement, provided concrete proof of what many had long suspected, but couldn't prove that the investigation into Timothy's murder had been deliberately hampered by racial bias and a desire to protect those with ties to the KKK.
He detailed the Klan's efforts to recruit officers and even named several KKK members who worked on Timothy's case after Oscar Jordan was removed.
It's a chilling thought. It suggests a conscious effort to shield Frank and Bill from justice and to maintain a system where white supremacy could operate with impunity. This was a deliberate perversion of justice fueled by racism.
Now, with a mountain of evidence and a clearer picture of the cover-up, they had enough to go after Frank and Bill, as well as those involved in obstructing the original investigation. But let's pause here and pick up with the arrests in part 2. Okay, so we left off with the authorities finally having enough evidence to go after those responsible for Timothy Coggins' murder.
Right.
It's a moment decades in the making, a glimmer of hope after years of darkness.
And this is where we see a glimmer of poetic justice. Remember Officer Oscar Jordan, the one who was unjustly pulled off the case back in '83?
How could I forget? He was so close to uncovering the truth.
Right.
And then, boom, reassigned to traffic duty.
Yeah.
It's a clear example of how this system failed Timothy and his family from the very beginning.
Absolutely.
So,
Agent Coleman, recognizing the injustice Jordan had faced, reached out to him
wow,
and asked if he wanted to be part of the team making the arrests.
that sends chills down my spine. To finally have the opportunity to bring some closure after all these years, what did he say?
Without hesitation, he said yes.
Wow.
And so in October 2017, more than 3 decades after Timothy Coggins was murdered, Frank Gart and Bill Moore were finally arrested.
I can only imagine the range of emotions Officer Jordan must have felt in that moment.
It must have been an incredibly powerful experience, a testament to his resilience and unwavering commitment to seeking truth despite the systemic obstacles he faced.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just Frank and Bill who were held accountable.
Right? There were others involved in covering up the crime. Those who actively obstructed the investigation and allowed Timothy's killers to walk free for all those years.
Exactly. Lamar Bunn, a police department employee, his mother Sandra, who we mentioned earlier, and a sheriff's deputy, Gregory Huffman, were also arrested for their roles in obstructing the original investigation.
So this wasn't just about a couple of bad apples. This was a systemic issue within the Spalding County Sheriff's Department.
Absolutely. The fact that individuals at various levels of law enforcement were complicit in covering up a racially motivated crime speaks to a deeply ingrained culture of racism.
And during a press conference, Sheriff Dix made it clear that investigators believed the crime was racially motivated,
Right.
stating that if it happened today, it would be prosecuted as a hate crime.
That statement is significant. It's a public acknowledgement of the racial element that was so blatantly ignored back in 1983.
Right?
It's a sign that hopefully things are changing,
Yeah.
that law enforcement is starting to take these types of crimes more seriously.
It also highlights the importance of leadership in setting a new tone and acknowledging past injustices.
Absolutely.
Sheriff Dix also pointed out that many witnesses were terrified to come forward back in '83. It took decades for them to feel safe enough to share what they knew.
Which speaks to the climate of fear that existed in Spalding County at the time. These people were scared for their lives, knowing that speaking out against those in power could have dire consequences.
And GBI agent Coleman went even further, calling Timothy's death a lynching. Given the brutality, the location, the hanging tree, the racist motive, it's hard to argue with that assessment.
The term lynching carries a specific historical weight, evoking the brutal extrajudicial killings that terrorized Black communities for generations.
Right.
By using this language, Coleman directly connected Timothy's murder to this legacy of racial terrorism, forcing people to confront the reality of what happened.
Frank and Bill were denied bail, with the judge citing their history of witness intimidation and their tendency to, well, brag about the murder as reasons to keep them behind bars.
Wow, that decision underscored the danger these men posed to the community.
Yeah.
The court recognized they were a flight risk and a threat to potential witnesses.
Right.
It's also pretty astounding that they felt so emboldened to brag about such a horrific crime.
At the grand jury hearing, Timothy's family had to sit there just feet away from Frank Gart and listen to the horrific details of his murder. It's hard to imagine the strength it took to face their brother's killer like that.
The grand jury hearing is a critical step in the legal process.
Mm-hmm.
It's where a group of citizens decides whether there's enough evidence to formally charge someone with a crime. In this case, the family's presence was a powerful statement.
Right.
They were demanding justice for Timothy, making sure his story was heard, and ensuring that Frank Gart would be held accountable for his actions.
And to make matters worse, Frank's lawyer had the audacity to call the witnesses, many of whom were incarcerated, trash.
This was a classic defense tactic, attempting to discredit witnesses based on their backgrounds, instead of addressing the substance of their testimony. It's a way of diverting attention from the actual evidence and preying on societal biases against those who have been incarcerated.
He tried to argue that their criminal records made them unreliable, but they were telling the truth. The evidence corroborated their stories.
Exactly. It was a desperate attempt to undermine the prosecution's case.
Yeah.
Fortunately, the jury wasn't swayed by these tactics.
The prosecution focused on the brutality of the murder, the racist motive, and the cover-up that allowed it to go unsolved for so long. And after 33 years, the jury finally delivered a verdict guilty.
That verdict was monumental,
Yeah.
not just for the Coggins family, but for the entire community that had been haunted by this crime for decades. It was a powerful message that even after years of impunity, justice could prevail, and that those who had been shielded by a racist system would finally be held accountable.
Frank was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years. And as the judge sentenced him, he said, "Hopefully, sir, you have stabbed your last victim."
Those words carry the weight of a community's pain and the hope for a future free from such senseless violence.
Yeah.
It's a recognition that Frank Gart's actions had far-reaching consequences impacting not just Timothy and his family, but the entire fabric of Spalding County.
And the jury foreman later revealed what ultimately sealed Frank's fate. They counted 17 times that he had admitted to the murder over the years.
It's a testament to Frank Gart's arrogance.
Yeah.
He truly believed he could get away with murder and brazenly boasted about it to anyone who would listen.
Wow.
It also speaks to the meticulous work of the prosecution, gathering evidence and presenting a compelling case that left no room for doubt.
Bill Moore, facing a similar fate, took a plea deal, pleading guilty to manslaughter and receiving a 20-year sentence.
Plea deals are common in these types of cases. It allows for a quicker resolution and removes the uncertainty of a trial.
Mm-hmm.
However, 20 years for manslaughter in a crime this brutal feels incredibly light.
It does feel like a slap on the wrist, especially considering the horrific nature of the crime and the years of pain inflicted on the Coggins family.
You're right. It raises questions about whether true justice was served and whether the punishment truly fit the crime, especially given the gravity of Moore's involvement.
Yeah.
It also reflects the historical tendency for sentencing disparities to favor white perpetrators, even in cases of clear racial violence.
Tragically, Timothy's mother, Viola, didn't live to see the convictions. But there's a twist to this story.
Okay.
It seems like she knew justice was coming.
This is where the story takes on an almost spiritual dimension.
Right.
The anecdote about Viola's premonition on her deathbed adds a layer of poignancy to the narrative.
While she was on her deathbed, she suddenly told her daughter, Tissa, "They found out who killed Tim. I ain't gonna be here for it, but they're gonna get who killed Tim."
That statement delivered with such certainty is both haunting and inspiring. It speaks to a mother's unwavering love for her son and her deep-seated faith that justice would prevail even if she wouldn't be alive to witness it. It's as if she had some kind of vision, or maybe it was just a mother's intuition, but either way, it's a powerful moment.
It's like she found a sense of peace, knowing that even though she wouldn't be there to see it, her son's killers would finally be held accountable.
It's a testament to the enduring power of hope and the belief that even in the face of unimaginable tragedy, truth has a way of surfacing.
Yeah.
It speaks to the profound connection between a mother and her child and how that bond can transcend even death.
For Tissa, hearing those words from her mother and then actually seeing the convictions, it must have brought a mix of closure and unimaginable sadness that her mother wasn't there to experience it.
It's a bittersweet victory.
Yeah.
The culmination of decades of pain and uncertainty, finally seeing justice served, but without her mother by her side.
Right.
Tissa's words about forgiveness despite everything her family endured are incredibly powerful.
She said, and I quote, Black people have a way, because of all that we've been through, the way we was raised. Forgiveness is the first thing that black people learn. After all the stuff that black people have endured from slavery up till now, we are still a forgiving people. It breaks my heart to think that forgiveness is something they've had to learn to cope with. Centuries of injustice.
It speaks volumes about the resilience and profound capacity for empathy that has sustained Black communities through generations of oppression.
Yeah.
It's a testament to the human spirit's ability to transcend even the most profound pain and to choose hope over hatred.
And it makes the work of people like Coleman Jordan and Dix even more crucial. They didn't just solve a case. They took a step towards healing a community that had been fractured by racism and injustice. Their dedication and commitment to justice brought a sense of closure to a case that had haunted Spalding County for over 3 decades. But before we get into the broader implications of this case and what it means for us today, let's take a moment to reflect on everything we've uncovered so far. Timothy Coggins' story, as we've seen, is so much more than just a murder case.
Yeah.
It's a stark reminder of how deeply racism is ingrained in the fabric of our society,
Absolutely.
and how easily it can be overlooked or even condoned, especially in places where it's been entrenched for generations.
You're absolutely right. This case lays bare the reality that the fight for racial justice is far from over.
Right.
It's not just about addressing those overt acts of discrimination, but about dismantling the systems and structures that continue to perpetuate inequality and protect those in power.
And it's a testament to the power of individuals to make a difference. Think about Agent Coleman. He could have easily let this case remain cold, buried under years of neglect and indifference.
Right.
But he chose to dig deeper, to fight for justice for Timothy and his family. And then there's Oscar Jordan,
Right.
who never gave up hope that the truth would come out, even after being unjustly removed from the investigation all those years ago.
Their actions demonstrate that even within systems that are often resistant to change, individuals can choose to act with courage and integrity.
Yeah.
It highlights the importance of accountability, holding those in power responsible for their actions, regardless of their position or connections.
And for the Coggins family, their strength and resilience through this ordeal is just awe-inspiring. They endured decades of pain, uncertainty, and fear, yet they never lost hope that justice would prevail.
Their story is a testament to the enduring power of love and the strength of the human spirit. It underscores the importance of listening to and believing victims, especially those who have been marginalized and silenced by systemic oppression.
Timothy's case reminds us that justice delayed is not always justice denied. It took over 30 years. But the truth finally came to light. And that's a powerful message. But it's also a cautionary tale. We can't let these stories fade into the background. We have to learn from them, and we have to continue pushing for a more just and equitable world.
It's a call to action for each of us to examine our own biases and to challenge systems of oppression wherever we see them. Timothy Coggins' story isn't just a historical event, it reflects the ongoing struggle for racial justice that continues to this day.
This case has stayed with me. The brutality, the injustice, the cover-up. It's hard to wrap your head around it all.
Yeah.
But it's also a story of incredible resilience.
Right.
The unwavering strength of a family determined to see justice done, and the ultimate power of truth to surface even after decades of darkness.
It leaves us with a powerful message. The fight for justice is a marathon, not a sprint. There will be setbacks and obstacles, but we must continue to push forward to demand accountability and to work towards a future where tragedies like this become relics of the past, not grim reminders of the present.
If you want to explore this case further, we highly recommend reading Wesley Lowery's incredible GQ article. We'll have a link to it in the episode description.
And if you found this deep dive insightful and thought-provoking, be sure to subscribe to the deep dive for more explorations of complex and captivating stories. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep seeking the truth.
That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.